It's my great pleasure today to be with Andy Nisbet. Hi Andy, how's things?
Hello, very well, thanks.
And Andy is one of Scotland's leading winter climbers. He is also a past president of the SMC. So we're going to talk a bit about your climbing, Andy, but also partly because about the role that you had within the SMC and obviously what you do in the SMC now. So as far as the hills are concerned, I know yesterday you were telling me one or two little things about your early memories of going up Munros. And that was at quite a young age, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed.
How old were you?
Well, my first Munro was when I was almost 6. My parents were very keen on hill walking, and yeah, I'd get dragged along, and I must admit it was dragged along until I was about 11. And I wasn't very good at sports in general, but at age 11 I went out with my classmates and we climbed one of the local hills near Aberdeen, Benahee, and I was really quite surprised that I was actually one of the fittest. I even remember now, even though I was only 11, that I was 4th to the top. And I thought, this is great, I like hill walking after all. So.
And how did that progress, Andy, to climbing?
Well, once I reached secondary school, there were a lot of teachers who were into Munro bagging, and they would take pupils out. This is Aberdeen Grammar School. In fact, I think 10 of the first 130 Munroists were connected with Aberdeen Grammar School, either pupils or teachers. So I was in a Munro bagging club and progressed very well, first with teachers and then with mates. So by the time I left school I only had a few to do, one holiday's worth in fact, but that included the Inaccessible Pinnacle, which of course is a climb, and we didn't know anything about climbing. So my dad said he'd teach me, which was great, except he'd never actually climbed himself, so so it was a bit of an adventure. He bought me a rope, which wasn't a very thick rope, and taught me basically what he'd read in, it was obviously a very old book he'd read, though perhaps Victorian times would do. So he taught us the shoulder belay, where you sit on a ledge, put the rope round your shoulder, and possibly take a stout hitch, if there is one, and bring your mates up. We didn't know how to tie on to the cliff, we didn't really know how to abseil or anything like that, so Inaccessible Pinnacle, I got volunteered to climb up with the rope in my rucksack, climbed up the long side, threw the rope down to my mates, and they climbed up the short side, and then I lowered them off, or possibly they down climbed. We sort of knew this wasn't maybe the perfect method. We definitely knew not to fall off, because staying on top would have been in doubt. And then when a real climber walked past, shook his head and walked on as if, I'm not speaking to these people, we kind of knew there was something more to it. But it was very exciting, and we got up and down and thought, this is good, we might try some climbing after this.
So that's how it sort of progressed and obviously started. And
yeah.
It sounds, Andy, a lot of that was almost sort of self-learned, really.
Yes, it kind of was, yes. And certainly the first time me and my mates went off to the hills, you know, we didn't know how to navigate. We bought a compass, and like when it got misty, we got it out of the packet. But of course, with misty, it's usually a bit damp, so the instructions got very wet and soggy almost immediately. So it was rather pot luck that we made it to the top of the hill and down.
As far as climbing is concerned, did you take any sort of courses as you realised that you sort of gained an immense amount of enjoyment from it?
Yeah, we did eventually. We started climbing and just went down to the Aberdeen Sea Cliffs by ourselves, and there we actually met other climbers and they showed us a few things. So we were learning as we went along, but we did also book on a course too. But we booked on the course, we were university students at this stage, we booked on the course 6 months ahead, and of course we're being super keen. By the time the 6 months was up, we'd actually done quite a lot of climbing, so we were actually quite reasonable climbers.
So the climbing at that stage, Andy, would that be just in the summer months, or spring, autumn, or would it progress to winter as well?
Well, it was in the summer months, and we learnt some of our rock climbing in the winter. But folks in Aberdeen winter climbed and summer climbed at the same time. So, and we'd hill walked a bit in winter before, so it was pretty natural to start winter climbing at the very first winter. But in fact, summer was first by 6 months, but we went winter climbing as fast as we could.
Well, of course, for quite a few years now, I believe are you now officially retired?
I'm officially retired, yes, yes, but only from instructing, and even
Yes.
that is somewhat optional.
But for many, many years, as you were saying, you were an instructor, but you guided clients, didn't you, around the hills?
Yes, that's right.
How did that start?
It started very slowly. I worked in the university for a while, and then I took a year off to go climbing, to go on a Himalayan expedition actually, and then more climbing. And then after I'd had a year climbing, it was pretty hard to actually go back to work. So I sort of signed on the dole, and you could do in those days, and did a bit more climbing. And then I ran out of money and did a short job and made enough money to have another winter climbing. It was all about winters at this stage, winters climbing. So I just got midged there.
Well, with that, I know a name that you've mentioned to me over the last couple of days, and that is Myrddyn Moran, and you used to work for Myrddyn, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I got into, lost track of the previous topic, but yeah, I did little bits and pieces of instructing work for Mal Duff when I was signing on the dole, and then I went on an Everest expedition, and other members were Glenmore Lodge instructors, Alan Fife and Bob Barton, and they said at the end, "You're not interested in a summer job, are you? Because we take on temporary instructors for a short period." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea." So I worked at Glenmore Lodge for a summer, and I actually really enjoyed it. And then I got a contract for 3 years working there, and at the end of that, worked for Myrddyn Moran for a while.
And of course, Myrddyn Moran is he did the Munros in winter, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. He
Yeah.
did all the Munros in a single trip in the winter.
Yeah, yeah.
He was-
So, as far as the climbing grades that you go up to, Andy, sort of for winter, what are your sort of, what's your extreme grade that you climb up to? But also, what's your sort of favourite ground that you go climbing on?
Well, my favourite ground is really what gets called mixed, but actually a lot of it is snow-covered rock and frozen turf. I do like ice as well, but I find mixed a bit more varied and challenging. But what was the other part of the question?
The grade that you
The grade, yes,
climb to.
yes, that's right. Yeah, well, I was quite lucky when I started winter climbing because most climbers were still cutting steps at that point, whereas I learned as a beginner to front point, so I had quite a big advantage. And as everyone caught on to front pointing, grades were shooting up. So I was able to climb right at the highest grade. In those days, it was grade 5 was the highest, but I was able to do a couple of routes that were graded 8 nowadays, which at the time was the highest, and probably amongst the hardest in the world, though I dare say there were lots and lots of climbers all suddenly starting to climb at high grades.
And I know even this past winter, you put up, was it about 70 odd?
I think it was 75 new routes this winter, yes.
That's pretty astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a particularly good winter, but I'm very keen, and I've got many years of experience knowing where the cliffs are and where the new routes are.
And your main sort of climbing partners that you go out with, who would that be?
Yeah, there's a number of folk round about where I live. It's a bit difficult sometimes because I'm free. Apart from weeks when I'm working, I'm free all the time. I'm not a weekend free and a midweek working person, so I tend to climb with other people who are free. It's quite handy just to hear the weather forecast in the evening and decide what you're doing the next morning, and most people aren't as flexible as that.
Yeah.
So I climb with other local guides and instructors mostly, and other friends nearby. So, yeah.
Now, if we could sort of progress to the SMC, when did you join?
I joined in 1977. By then, well, me and my climbing partner, we just climbed a particularly difficult route on Craig and Duloch, and I guess Bill Brooker, who was then leading light in the SMC, and also in the climbing club in Aberdeen, which I was in, he just came up to me and my mate one day and said, "You two lads are climbing well, you ought to join the SMC." Because it wasn't an invite, of course, it was just a suggestion. He said, "I'll propose you." And we knew a few other climbers in the SMC, so Bill proposed us, and we got our 3 seconders, and we'd done all the necessary climbing and walking by more than enough.
When you say the necessary climbing and walking, because there is a qualification that certain things you had to have
that's
done.
right, yes.
What are those?
Yeah, right. You need to lead VS in the summer. You don't necessarily have to have done a huge number, but you have to show you lead VS. And grade 4 in the winter. And to have done 50 Monroes. It sounds a bit like a bit strange, but the idea is just to make sure that everyone who joins is keen and active in all forms in the Scottish Hills. It doesn't actually matter whether you were born or lived in Scotland, it's just being interested in the Scottish Hills that counts.
Now, of course, I know last year you were the president of, Scottish Mountaineering Club, the SMC. How did that come about?
I was invited by the committee. The president is sort of, you're the figurehead of the club in many ways, rather than there being particularly onerous duties. So I was well known as a climber. I'd done a lot of guidebook writing for the club, so I think I was thought to be suitable. And yeah.
How long did the presidency last for you?
It lasts 2 years. Yeah, and now someone else has recently taken over.
And the role, Andy, during those 2 years, what kind of sort of role does the president take on?
Well, I say, but he's the figurehead really, so somebody reasonably well known and respected in the climbing community, as well as someone who's done a lot for the SMC. Really, the biggest jobs are chairing committees, the main committee. Just keeping a general eye on activities of the club, being enthusiastic, and yeah, that's the main thing. Oh yes, you get to go to other clubs' dinners if you're invited as a guest, which is not too onerous.
That sounds a good role.
That sounds a good role, yes.
And what about your role today within the SMC? Because you are still active, aren't you?
I'm still very active climbing, yes. I'm the new routes editor and have been for many years. So when people do first ascents, they send the descriptions to me. I'm also involved with guidebook writing. Moment, very busy writing, or coordinating as much as my own writing. Authors for Highland Outcrops, the new edition.
Yeah.
But last year, a few years, it's been the Sport Climbing Guide, which is just recently out.
You mentioned earlier on, Andy, an Everest expedition, and I know very shortly you're off to Norway to go climbing.
Mm.
Over the years, what sort of expeditions have you been on, and where to?
Climbing in Scotland's still my favourite, so expeditions I haven't been on a great number. I used to work for a company that did trekking peaks in Nepal, so I went many times there. And when I was working for Martin Moran, I was guiding on peaks in India. And Martin's quite ambitious, so I actually did some really quite significant first ascents with the clients in India. In terms of my own expeditions, I've been to India the last couple of years and done the first ascents of 2 6,000 metre peaks. Before that, there was the Everest expedition in 1985, where quite a big group of us from Britain, we tried the second attempt on the northeast ridge of Everest. We weren't successful, but we were fairly cautious and all came back uninjured.
The northeast ridge, is that the one with the pinnacles?
Yeah, that's the one with the pinnacles. It's
Yeah.
basically the most difficult of the Everest ridges and has
Well-
only been climbed recently.
Was it that expedition, Andy, that somebody got over the pinnacles but then came down to the North Col?
Yeah, that's right. The very first attempt, Pete Borman and Joe Tasker got well through the pinnacles but then died. After us, I think maybe a couple of expeditions after us, a team did get through the pinnacles, but actually through the pinnacles is still quite a long way from the summit. The northeast ridge joins the north ridge, which is the normal route from Tibet. So having reached the normal route, they then came down the north ridge. I doubt they thought it was a complete ascent, even though they'd done all the new climbing. I think they probably just ran out of steam and decided that coming back alive was better than the 50-50 chance at best if they'd carried on. And that did happen a few times until a team fairly recently did make it to the summit, but only by using Sherpas, which in our day wasn't permitted in Tibet, so we had to do all our own load carrying.
Have you done any mountaineering out in South America?
No, I've never been to South America. I've climbed a bit in Alaska. There was a plan to climb in Alaska and then go on to South America, but I think after 3 months in Alaska we'd had enough and decided to come back to Scotland for some real mountains.
And as far as the future is concerned, Andy, presumably you'll carry on with your love of the Scottish winter climbing.
Yes, very much so. Yes, equipment's improving all the time, so my grade's not dropping. The fact that everyone else's grade is going up is not that important to me. I can still do my new routes.
And having been out on the hills with you the last couple of days, I think you're tremendous. You have a very quiet sort of confidence, and you give confidence to the people around you as well. So, but any last comments, Andy, before we close off?
No, yeah. Easier to answer questions. But, no, I just hope I'll be able to go to the hills for a long time. Climbing's fine. It's hard to know whether climbing will outlast walking. I used to always think I would still hill walk when I stopped climbing, but actually you can carry on climbing possibly longer than hill walking. It just depends which bits of the body give up first. So,
Well, Andy Nisbet, it's been a delight to meet you today, and many thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, it's a shame about the midges, but I guess that's Scotland.
Cheers, Andy. Thank you.
Okay.